Hey dear students, there I am Allan, Assistant Professor Department of English, Bethuadahari College. In this video I am going to be talking about The Telltale Heart, a short story by Edgar that was published in the year 1843. And this text is prescribed in the syllabus major paper 301 entitled English Essay and Short Story of 3rd semester under University of Allan. I am going to do an introduction with the author's background first, and then I will be talking about the critical summary, analysis of the text, and also about its themes, symbolism, discussion questions, and to be followed by conclusion. So let's get started. And in this video, I'm going to give you an overall view of this text for your better understanding and to make you prepared for the examinations. So the introduction of this text, and The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan is a classic short story of Gothic world fiction, and that was first published in the year 1843. And it's one of those based on short stories, and the story is told by an unnamed narrator who endeavors to convince the readers of his sanity while narrating a murder he committed. And the victim was an old man with a filmy pale blue quote-unquote vulture eye, and the murder is carefully calculated, and the narrator hides the body by dismembering it and hiding it under the floorboards. Ultimately, the narrator's speech manifests itself, and the narrator ultimately admits it. And after this introduction, now I will be going to be talking about the briefly the author's background. And as I have already told you, that Edgar Allan Poe was born in the year 1809 in Boston, Massachusetts, and he was an American author, poet, editor, and at the same time literary critic, and he was considered part of the American Romantic movement. Edgar Allan Poe was best known for his tales of mystery and macabre. An earliest practitioner of short story he is regarded as, and he is also generally considered the inventor of the detective fiction of genre. And he was also credited with contributing to the emerging genre of science fiction. And his works, The Telltale Heart and The Fall of the House of the Usher, became literary classics. And he took his last breath in the year 1849. And after this author's background, now I am switching over to the next slide. That is a brief notes on short story, because this text is a short story, and first, and that's why you have to know a little bit about short story. So just a few lines about short story. And short story is a piece of prose fiction, typically can be read in a single setting, and it focuses on a self-contained incident or series of linked incidents with the intent of evoking a single effect. And Edgar Allan Poe was a pioneer of short story, and in the philosophy of composition, he gave the definition of short story. And a typical plot would have one or two short pieces of action introduced and brought to a climax, often by a twist at the end, set in only one place, and characters are few in number, and the primary focus is only on one. And I think you have heard the name of Anton Chekhov, and Anton Chekhov thought that a short story should have neither beginning nor an end, like rhizome, it exists only in the middle, and it should be a quote-unquote slice of life. And thereafter we have to know the four names from the four corners of the world, and one of them is Guy de Maupassant from France, Anton Chekhov from Russia, O. Henry from America, and Rabindranath Tagore from India. And The Telltale Heart is a perfect model of the genre. And after this brief introduction of short story, now I will be talking about the title analysis of this text in the next slide. So the very title of this text is The Telltale Heart. And this title is very significant, and this title actually consists of two terms, telltale and heart. And telltale is an adjective, and it means revealing, indicating, or betraying something. And heart, a muscular organ of the circulatory system, and pumping blood throughout the body to deliver oxygen and nutrients. But rhetorically, heart symbolizes emotion, passions, feelings, conscience, love, etc. And heart in this text reveals and stands for guilt, conscience, and ultimately tells the tale of guilt, no matter how deeply it is buried. And after this title analysis, now I am going to be talking about the genre of this text. So this text is regarded as a horror in Gothic fiction. And then as a Gothic fiction, we have to know certain features of Gothic fiction. So snapped minds, crypt-like spaces, death and dismemberment, fear, the extremes of human behavior, a juxtaposition of the sacred and the profane are some signs in a Gothic story. and the telltale heart is an ambiguous topic. It's so ambiguous that it is harder to explain, and it is also an open-ended text with multiple interpretations, and many things in the story do not make sense and no reasonable explanation is there. That's why this is a Gothic horror fiction. And after this analysis, now I am switching over to the next slide, and in this slide now I will be talking about the setting of this story. And the story takes place during the 1800s society, and the text actually entails the inner bedroom of the old man, and who is actually murdered in this text. So the story takes place in the 1800 bedroom of the old man, and the plot develops for 8 days, and the murder takes place on the 8th night in the old man's bedroom, and this actually enhances the mood of fear and suspense. The setting is dark, claustrophobic, and tense, matching the narrator's perturbed mental state. And the landscape of the narrator's perturbed mind is also a setting of the story. That is very important, you should keep in mind. And the story actually lacks a detailed physical setting, who uses the dark, confined interior of the house and the late night timing to heighten the psychological horror and suspense. Now, in the next slide, I will be talking about the point of view, that is how the story is being told to the readers and us. And the narrator of the Telltale Heart is unreliable first person, like most four narrators, and the story is told by the unnamed narrator, and he is the protagonist and the murderer. The narration follows the narrator's thoughts and emotions, giving direct insight into his growing obsession, guilt, paranoia, which ultimately leads to the stream of consciousness. And the first question of point of view creates a psychological depth and intensity, and it makes the readers experience the narrator's descent into madness. It builds suspense and horror that we can't trust what the narrator says, and it enhances psychological horror and dramatic tension. And after this point of view, now I will be talking about the critical summary of this text in the very few next slides. Okay. So, though this is one of Poe's best short stories, it is nevertheless profound, and at times all the investigation of man's paranoia, and the story gains its intensity by the manner in which it portrays how the narrator stalks his victim as though he were a beast of prey, and yet at the same time elevated by human intelligence to a higher level of human endeavor, whose murder is created into type of grotesque anomaly. In a sense, the narrator is worse than a beast. Only a human being could so completely terrorize the victim before finally killing it. And as for example, the narrator deliberately terrorizes the old man before killing him. And as noted in the introduction to this section, the story shows the narrator's attempt to rationalize his irrational behavior. And the story begins with the narrator admitting that he is very dreadfully nervous type. And this type is found throughout all of Poe's fictions, particularly in the overwrought, hypersensitive works. He begins by stating that he is not mad, yet he will continue his story and will reveal not only that he is mad, but he is terribly mad. His sensitivities allow him to hear and sense things in heaven, hell, and on earth that people are not even aware of. His oversensitivity becomes in this story the ultimate cause of his obsession with the old man's eye, which in turn causes him to murder the old man. And ironically, the narrator offers as proof of his sanity the calmness with which he can narrate the short story. And the story begins boldly and unexpectedly with the line, quote unquote, "I love the old man," the narrator says, adding that he had never wronged me. Next, he reveals that he was obsessed with the old man's eye. That was the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. And without any real motivation then other than his psychotic obsession, he decides to take the old man's life. And even though he knows that the readers might consider him mad for this decision, yet he plans to prove his sanity by showing how wisely and with what extreme precaution, foresight, and dissimulation he executed his deeds. Every night at 12 o'clock, he would slowly open the door. Oh, so gently, and would quietly and cunningly poke his head very slowly through the door. It would sometimes take him an hour to go that far. Would a madman have been so wise as this? He asks, thus showing, he hopes, how thoroughly objective he can be while commenting on the horrible deed he committed. For 7 nights he opened the door, ever so cautiously. Then when he was just inside, he opened his lantern just enough so that one small ray of light would cast its tiny ray upon the vulture eye. And the following morning he would go into the old man's chamber and speak to him with cordiality and friendship as if nothing happened in the last night. and on the 8th night he decided it was the time to commit the deed. And when he says, I fairly chuckled at the idea. We know that we are indeed dealing with a highly disturbed personality, despite the fact that he seems to present his story very coherently. And on this particular night, on the 8th day, unlike the preceding 7 nights, the narrator's hand slipped on the flaps of the lantern, and the old man immediately sprang up in bed, crying out, Who is there? He can see nothing because the shutters are all closed. Here, as in most of those stories, the action proper of the story takes place within a closed surrounding. That is, the murder of the old man is within the confines of a small bedroom with the shutters closed and in complete darkness. The old man's moans were low, stifled sounds that arose from the bottom of the soul when he overcharged with awe. And the narrator knew that the old man felt that he was in the room, and dramatically, when he opened his lantern to let a small ray of light out, it fell full upon the vulture. And when he saw that hideous pale die, he became furious. But he warns the reader not to mistake his over-acuteness of the senses for madness, because he says that suddenly there came to his ears a low, dull, quick sound, and it was the beating of the old man's heart. It is at this point the story that we have our first ambiguity based upon the narrator's oversensitivity and madness. And the question is obviously, whose heart does he hear? We all know that in moments of stress and fight, our own heartbeat increases so rapidly that we feel every beat. Consequently, from the psychological point of view, the narrator thinks that he is hearing his own increased heartbeat. As he waits, the heartbeat which he heard excited him to uncontrollable terror, for the heart seemed to be beating louder and louder. The narrator was suddenly aware that the old man's heartbeat was so loud that the neighbors might hear it. Thus the time had come. He dragged the old man to the floor, pulled the mattresses over him, and slowly the muffled sound of the heart ceased to beat, and the old man is dead. The old man was dead, and his eye would tell me no more, as it is said by the narrator. And again, the narrator attempts to show us that because of the wise precautions he took, no one could consider him to be mad, that he is in fact not mad. First, he dismembered the old man, and afterward there was not a spot of blood anywhere. And the mere narration here shows how the narrator, with his wild laughter, has indeed lost his national faculties. And likewise, the delight he takes in dismembering the old man is an act of extreme abnormality. And after the dismembering and the cleaning up were finished, the narrator carefully removed the planks from the floor on the old man's room and placed all the parts of the body under the floor. As he surveyed his work, the doorbell rang at 4 a.m. and the police were there to investigate some shrieks. And the narrator admitted the police to the house with a light heart, since the old man's heart was no longer beating, and he let the police thoroughly search the entire house. Afterward, he bade the police to sit down, and he brought a chair and sat upon the very spot beneath which he reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were so convinced that there was nothing to be discovered in the apartment that could account for the shrieks that they sat chatting idly. Then suddenly a noise began with the narrator's ears. He grew agitated and spoke with a heightened voice. The sound increased. It was a low, dull, quick sound. We should note that the words used here to describe the beating of the heart are the exact words used only moments earlier to describe the murder of the old man. As the beating increased, the narrator foamed and wept. In contrast to the turmoil going on in the narrator's mind, the police continued to chat pleasantly. The narrator wonders how it was possible that they did not hear the loud beating, which was becoming louder and louder. He can stand the horror no longer, because he knows that they are making a mockery of my horror, as I said in the text. And anything was better than this agony. Thus, as the beating of the heart becomes intolerable, he screams out to the police, I admit that he confesses that did. Tear up the planks. Here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. So that's all about the summary of this text, a critical summary of this text. And in the very next slide, I will be talking about some unknown words, which I think is very important to know. That's why in this slide, there are some unknown and uncommon words like foresight, sagacity, suavity, scantlings, repose, dedication, etc. And immediately after that, in the very next few slides, I will be talking about the analysis of this text, or I am going to analyze the text very critically. So we have seen that the Telltale Heart uses an unreliable and unnamed narrator, and the way narrator narrates murdering the old man, still the way, this is actually evidence of sanity, and this actually reveals his monomania and paranoia, and the narrator is assumed to be a male, and some critics suggested that a woman may be narrating, but no pronoun is used in this text to clarify that. And the story starts in the media stress, that is in the middle of this text, and opening with a conversation already in progress between the narrator and an unidentified person. And the unidentified person may be a judge, a prison warden, a reporter, or a doctor, or a psychiatrist with whom the narrator was conversing with. And the narrator tells the story in great detail, and the study of horror, retelling events from the past. And the first word of this story is true. It's an admission of guilt as well as assurance of reliability. The narrator's insistence not upon innocence but on sanity. This is the self-destructive because in attempting to prove the sanity, he fully admits that he is guilty of the murder. And if psychological confusion is disclosed, referring to the narrator and the comment that object there was none, patient there was none, but the idea of murder haunted me day and night, as said by the narrator. And the final scene shows the narrator's feelings of guilt. Overactiveness of the senses helps in hearing the heart beating beneath the floorboards, and this is actually evidence of madness. And the guilt in the narrator is revealed when the narrator confesses that the corpse is under the floorboards, and the confusion can be due to a concept called, this is quote unquote, the illusion of transparency. And the narrator claims to have a disease that causes hypersensitivity. It is also possible that the narrator has paranoid schizophrenia, in which the patient very often experiences auditory hallucinations. And the hallucinations do not need to derive from a specific source other than one's head, which is another indication that the narrator is suffering from such a psychological disorder. And the relationship between the old man and the narrator is ambiguous. The narrator may be a servant or of the old man or his child, and in that case, the vulture eye as a father figure may symbolize parental surveillance or the paternal principles of right and wrong. And the murder of the eye then is the removal of conscience. And the eye may also represent secrecy when the eye is found open on the final night. Penetrating the veil of secrecy, the murder is carried out. So this is the analysis of the text. Now in the very next slide, I will be talking about the characters of this story. So there is the unnamed narrator, the old man, the neighbor, the policeman. These are the few characters in this text. And briefly now I will be talking about in the very few slides, in the very few slides, the characterization of this text. First of all, the narrator. And in this text we have seen that the characteristic features of the narrator that can be found in him are that the narrator is paranoid, is a stalker, two-faced, grumpy, that is quick-tempered and choleric, cruel, sadist, clever, guilt-ridden. So these are the characteristic features which can be found in the narrator. And personally, I would now like to suggest and advise the students to substantiate the answer with close reference to the text. And thereafter, the old man. And old man is kind and harmless. He is wealthy and respected, vulnerable, possesses the vulture eye, which is actually the ultimate cause of killing, and he is the tragic victim. And thereafter, in the very few 2 and 3 slides, I will be talking about the psychological aspects of the narrator by implementing the famous psychiatrist Sigmund Freud and his theory of ego, superego, and id. And ego, superego, and id are actually the 3 parts of the psychic apparatus defined in Sigmund Freud's structural model of the psyche. And they are the 3 theoretical constructs in terms of whose activity and interaction human mental life is described. And according to this model of the psyche, the id is the set of uncoordinated instinctual traits, and the superego plays the critical and moralizing role, and the ego is the organized, realistic part that mediates between the desires of the id and the superego. And Edgar Allan Poe's this story shows a narrator being driven mainly by his ego. The narrator starts out by claiming that he is not mad and continues to make his claim throughout the story using a logical approach. Logically speaking, a madman would not be able to recount murder. So this is the brief psychological analysis of the narrator. Now in the very next two slides I will be talking about the themes of this text. The major themes of this text are madness and sanity, perception and reality, and obsession and fixation. So these are the main themes of this text, and the central conflict revolves around the narrator's insistence on his sanity despite committing a horrific act, and his heightened sentence and meticulous planning prove his mental clarity. But in the story suggests he is deeply disturbed, and along with this madness and sanity there are the other themes which I have already told you. And next in the two slides I will be talking about the symbolism of this text. So there are mainly the symbols of the eye, the heart, and the house, and the police are used in this text. So the eye is the very crucial symbol in this text, and the eye represents perception, awareness, and truth. Eye is the reason for killing the old man, whose reference to the eye as evil suggests a commonly held belief in the supernatural ability to cast a curse with a malevolent glare. The narrator calls the old man's eye the quote-unquote vulture eye, and vultures are the scavengers that eat dead things. The eye signals how central death is to the story. Eye also symbolizes old man's power, and the narrator's lantern echoes the old man's eye. And the next very important symbol in this text is the heart. And even the heart represents the emotion, whereas the eye represents intelligence. So the inclusion of both the symbols created war between reason and emotion. And the heart drives the narrator to kill the old man and confess the murder at the same time. And the passion is symbolized by the loud beating of the heart. And in the very penultimate slide, I will be talking about some discussion questions important and which I think the students should get prepared for the examinations. So there are some questions like what components of a scary story are present in this story. Briefly discuss the stylistic elements in the story, the telltale heart. Comment on the significance of the eye in the telltale heart. Comment on the significance of the heartbeat in the telltale heart. Describe the night of the murder, and how does it build up the atmosphere of horror. These are some sample questions which I think is very important for the examinations, and students should take preparation along these lines. So the final in the final slide I will be talking about the conclusion of this text, and we have come almost to the finishing point of this video too. And in the conclusion, you can say that the story shows the complete psychological collapse of the narrator, and the ending reveals that guilt is inescapable, madness destroys rational thought, and the truth cannot be permanently hidden. The undone guilt is buried in the unconscious level of mind, but once the guilt is committed, the heart becomes overweighted and pushes forward it into the conscious level of mind and reveals the sin. So that's all about the text, the telltale heart. Thank you so much for watching the video patiently.